Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.
Is it time to swap out your wardrobe for summer? It sure feels like it at the start of this week with highs in the 80s across lower elevations of our state. More typical spring temperatures should move in later in the week, but meteorologists do expect that overall this spring will be warmer than average. So maybe go ahead with that closet change. I'm Bazi Kanani. Coming up, there's a vote tonight that could change the future for professional women's soccer in our state.
There's a lot that needs to happen before this is a done deal in Denver.
Then, how new legislation could speed up DNA testing in sex assault cases in Colorado.
I can't heal, get closure, or move forward with my life while this process drags on with no end in sight.
Also, maybe you've been stuck in your car while one crossed by.
You sit there and you hear them cha-chin, 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 cha-chin.
We answer a question about coal trains in this week's Colorado Wonders. It's Monday, May 12th. Here's the news in Colorado today. Whether Colorado actually gets a professional women's soccer team may hinge on how the Denver City Council votes tonight. They're considering one of the largest proposed investments in women's soccer in the U.S. and in the world, one that could combine hundreds of millions in private investment with tens of millions from local taxpayers. Council members are being asked to approve the city's spending on this deal. Denverite reporter Paolo Shalcita joins us now to break down the proposal and to tell us more about the sticking points. Paolo, before we talk about the cost, will you first summarize what we know about the plans for the new team at this point?
The idea is that the team will eventually get a permanent home in Denver, but until that can be decided and built, the team expects to play at a temporary stadium in Centennial. As for that permanent home, owners have identified an area near I-25 and Broadway in Denver's Baker neighborhood with plans to build a 14,000-seat stadium.
And that would be one of the first stadiums in the country built specifically for a women's team.
That's right. The only other one is in Kansas City. But there's a lot that needs to happen before that's a done deal in Denver.
So how much money are we talking about here? What are Denver taxpayers being asked to give in order to convince the team's owners to build and to play here?
Yeah, officials have said construction on the new stadium will cost up to $200 million. The team's investors would pay for that. That's on top of a world record-breaking fee they paid to secure the rights to the team. The city of Denver is proposing to chip in $70 million to buy the land for the stadium and make infrastructure improvements around it.
Investors have certainly put up a lot of money for the project already, and they're hoping to recoup at least some of those expenses.
Yeah, they're planning to apply for this thing called TIF. That's short for tax increment financing. What it basically means is the soccer team's owners could get a percentage of tax revenue the city collects because of new development in the area, like sales tax coming in from bars and restaurants. They could use that money to get refunded for building the stadium. I spoke with Rob Cohen, the primary owner of the team.
As an ownership group, we're not planning on any TIF as a part of it, but if the overall project is successful, then we should participate in it just like everybody else, because we're going to be the catalyst for it happening.
The team's owners and backers of the plan here insist that this will be an excellent investment, that it will revitalize part of the city around the stadium. Why are some people skeptical about this investment?
Well, some experts warn me that soccer and sports in general often attract risky investments by governments and private investors. I spoke with Kieran Maguire. He's a finance professor at the University of Liverpool who wrote a book about the economics of soccer.
Football is the most incredible mistress of club owners. It turns them from rational, sane, profit-maximizing businessmen into simpering, gibbering wrecks.
Maguire says soccer is an industry designed to lose money, that owners are often choosing passion over profit. Now, Cohen said the team's model is built for eventual profitability, but he did acknowledge that isn't likely to happen soon.
And what about the potential revenue for the city?
Another expert I spoke with cast doubts on the lofty promises the city made. Jeffrey Profiter is a professor of public affairs at CU Denver. He's devoted most of his career to studying stadium financing and their impact on surrounding neighborhoods.
When you subsidize sports, you are subsidizing a party. Okay, who doesn't love a house party, right? But you, the owner, the administrator of the house party, have to incur costs. You are losing money, but that's not why you're having the house party. You're not throwing the house party to make money. You're throwing the house party for the community and socialization, and it's fun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
The city's finance department also did a study on this. It found that over the next 30 years, the stadium could generate over $500 million in tax revenue from spending in and near the facility. However, the study noted that while spending in the area will increase, it may simply redirect economic activity from other parts of the city. Profiter also cast doubt on the accuracy of these kinds of internal studies.
How would this investment in a women's pro team compare with the city's past investments in men's teams?
So Denver proper has 3 sports stadiums, one for basketball, one for baseball, one for football, and all of those received some form of public subsidy. Coors Field and Empower Field were partially funded through a sales tax, while Ball Arena got TIF dollars. But it's worth mentioning that those happened in vastly different markets. All of them happened before the 2008 financial crisis, and now some doubting the city's investment in the NWSL Stadium are pointing towards signs that another recession could be on the horizon, potentially impacting the promise both the city and the team has been touting.
We'll continue to follow your reporting on this. Thanks, Paolo.
Of course.
Thousands of sexual assault victims in Colorado have been waiting a really long time for results from DNA testing. The average wait is more than 500 days, and this evidence can be critical for criminal investigations. Miranda Spencer is one of the victims who've been impacted.
Over 400 days ago, I sat in a hospital terrified, confused, shocked, and broken after going on a Bumble date that would end up being the biggest regret of my life.
Spencer testified at the state capitol. She's part of a backlog that now has more than 1,300 people.
Can you imagine what it must be like for someone to experience such trauma, report it, and then sit in a holding pattern for an unpredictable amount of time? Unfortunately, I can tell you exactly what it's like, and it's torture. I worry if my perpetrator is victimizing others. I worry my perpetrator will come back for me in retaliation.
Lawmakers do have a plan now to cut down this backlog in the months ahead, but it won't happen quickly. CPR's Benta Birkeland reports that one thing lawmakers did this session was give $3 million to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, the lab responsible for testing this evidence. Most of these funds will go toward reducing the backlog.
So part of that is processing and outsourcing kits, and then the rest of the money's dealing with other things at CBI. With those funds comes a new requirement. The CBI has to provide regular updates on how this money's being used.
The governor has already signed that bill, and lawmakers also created an independent panel.
And it will include people from nonprofits representing victims and law enforcement and all these various entities that impact the backlog. The idea there is they'll really be keeping an eye on things, reporting to the legislature. The state is trying to prevent the cases from ballooning again without anyone really noticing. So they can figure out trends and maybe ways to use technology to just really get a handle on things moving forward so we're not in this position again as a state.
One reason for the backlog involves a former forensic scientist with the Bureau of Investigations. Yvonne Missy Woods was with CBI for nearly 3 decades. She worked on many high-profile cases. But coworkers started to raise red flags about her, alleging that she was manipulating DNA test results and cutting corners. Nearly half the cases allegedly mishandled by Woods were sexual assault cases, and already existing staff shortages made for a, quote, perfect storm. Here's former CBI Director Chris Schaefer.
We had to shut down basically 50% of our DNA sciences for the better part of a year to go through and research, the over 10,000 cases that our former scientists had worked.
A backlog quickly ballooned. Woods now faces more than 100 felony charges, including cybercrime, perjury, and forgery. Her arraignment is scheduled for August. Again, the situation with Woods is just one of the factors that led to this large backlog of sex assault cases. And while lawmakers have taken steps to address the problem, victims like Miranda Spencer continue to wait. Whether on the Front Range or in western Colorado, you've definitely seen coal trains at some point with heaping black piles and car after car. Bob Cohn's seen them.
You sit there and you hear them cha-chin, 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 cha-chin. And I had this question. I wonder where all that coal goes.
Particularly given Colorado's coal plants are getting phased out. CPR's Ishan Thakur has the answer in this week's installment of Colorado Wonders. Ishan, first, how much coal does the state still use right now?
It is still a pretty big part of our energy mix, but it's a lot less than it used to be. Will Torr runs Colorado's energy office.
If you were to go back, 15 years ago, just under 70% of our electricity came from coal. We're now in the middle of this major transition away from coal.
So 70% around 2010. Today, it's less than half of that. And the amount of coal the whole market is demanding right now across the country is really going down.
President Trump is trying to revive coal, however. How is that going?
So last month, he did issue an executive order to, quote, reinvigorate America's beautiful clean coal industry. But the economics are really moving away from coal in red and blue states, and that's unlikely to change.
Coal production is going down, but we're definitely still seeing it in those long freight trains that come through heaping with coal. Is all that coal produced here in Colorado?
So some of it is. We've been talking for a long time about how the state's moving away from coal, that someone might think it's already gone already. But Colorado still has 10 active coal-fired power plants. Some of those are on the western slope. Those are called Craig and Hayden, but others are on the Front Range, like the Comanche Complex in Pueblo. A lot of the coal you'll see originates out of state and passes through Colorado. And up north, Wyoming is really the country's king of coal. There's a massive coal deposit there called the Powder River Basin.
Where is all that coal going when it comes through here?
Some of that coal will feed Colorado's coal-fired power plants. So Comanche and Pueblo, that got millions of tons of coal last year from Wyoming and Montana. The state, though, is working on closing that facility. Some coal from the western slope is also exported to international markets, and in particular, the market for coal is huge in Texas. Jack Wheeler runs a passenger rail advocacy group called Colo Rail.
The trains that people see along the Front Range that are filled with coal are bound for markets south, typically Texas.
But overall, there are still fewer coal trains coming through the state. That's why, for example, Colorado can consider making deals to use train tracks for passenger rail. So it's taken decades to move away from coal, and that transition is certainly not over. But maybe, in the not too distant future, you and me will get stuck behind a 100-car train carrying wind turbines instead.
We have already seen those on the roads, on those long semi-beds. Thanks, Ishan.
Thanks so much, Bazi.
If you have a question about our state, ask it through Colorado Wonders at the link in our show notes. Reporting for today's show also came from CPR's Benta Birkeland, Stephanie Wolf, and Tony Gorman. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tap follow on Colorado Today in your podcast app. If you hear something you like, tap the share button to send it to a friend or a social media account. I'm Bazi Kanani. This is CPR News.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.